Hello, my name is Joshua Nelson. Welcome to the Seek Community Podcast. Here we talk about dating, how people meet people, and building community. I want to talk about this porn-demic going on right now. And I think it's fueled by loneliness. I've did a bit of research on this. And I also want to say too, anecdotally, I think I am an example of what's going on right now. I'm among those men who are alone most of the time and single and struggle with porn. I would say that I stopped watching porn, but it's still tempting to watch it at times. I'm just being candid and open with you. It's kind of hard not to when, you desire to be with a woman, you're abstaining yourself from sex until marriage. So what do you do in the meantime? And porn satisfies that in a sense, but it's like a false satisfaction. It's a thirst that'll never be quenched. You'll never be satisfied. The flesh and the devil will never be satisfied. So that's something that I continue to struggle with, just to be candid with you. I struggle with pornography. And it's good for me to be open about that because even though I am a virgin and I'm saving myself for marriage, I still have struggles with lust just like everybody else. And I've still sinned sexually just like everybody else. So I'm just like you. Nothing about me makes me special, and I'm not trying to come off as though I'm better. But I formed this podcast because this is something that I want to talk about. And this is the core of this whole podcast, Seek Community, because throughout my experiences ever since I was like 17 when I became Christian, sexual sin has been a theme of my spiritual journey. Sexual sin has been a theme of my spiritual journey, just like finding and building community has. And I would say that has been pivotal to my spiritual growth. But I did some research into this, and basically Pew Research released a report showing over 60% of men reported that they were single, and basically most men are single and most women are not single. And men were more likely to be lonely and single, sexually dormant, and romantically uninvolved. We're also most likely to do mass shootings and to watch pornography and to commit suicide, to fall into video games. All of those pathologies stem from male loneliness, I think. And that's not empirical, but I just think it makes sense. If you're alone a lot of the time, if you feel shut out from society, I think it makes sense, right? When you look at male singleness and the stats, and when you look at who are the main perpetrators of a lot of these heinous crimes and all of these sexual assaults against women, I can bet you that it stems from male loneliness. So yes, it's definitely a lot of men who are struggling with this. Men, we're very visual. We're very horny most of the time. We can have sex with a bunch of women indiscriminately if we could. That's something I would want to do. I know I'm a Christian, but if I wasn't a Christian, I'd be sleeping around like crazy. And that's why I think a lot of us fall into porn, because it does take us on that ride of fulfilling our sexual fantasies, even though it is a counterfeit fulfillment. But there's an interesting quote that I want to read too from Fred Robinowitz. He's a psychologist and professor at the University of Redlands, and he studies masculinity. And I'm going to read the quote. It says, "Young men," quote, "are watching a lot of social media. They're watching a lot of porn. And I think they're getting a lot of their needs met without having to go out. And I think that's starting to be a habit." And I said this in my last podcast. We have a lack of infrastructure that's not conducive to building community. It's keeping us in the home, and we're getting our sexual needs fulfilled at home. You've got OnlyFans. You've got all these girls pretending to be your girlfriend for you on the internet. You got girls who will text with you, just to pretend that they're your girlfriend. Technology is getting so much better that it's simulating a sexual experience for men at home. So it's disincentivizing us to leave the house, and it's fueling this porn-demic that's going on right now. I like that word, porn-demic. I think there's a documentary called Porn-demic, but I thought I coined that word, but had to look it up. I was like, no, somebody else got it. It was a documentary called Porn-demic. It was about how HIV ravaged the porn community industry in California. I haven't seen it, but yes, we are living in a porn-demic, and most men, we're the largest consumers of porn. I am among those men who watch porn, and I still struggle with porn. Again, I'm single. I'm alone a lot of the time. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily lonely. I tell myself that I'm lonely, but I'm really not lonely because I keep myself busy. I got a lot of stuff going on. this podcast that I'm building up. I got filmmaking that I'm into. So I write movie scripts. I try to stay out the house most of the time. I go to the gym, I work out, try to stay active, try to get plugged in community. So I'm not necessarily lonely per se. I am alone a lot of the time. And I do have a lot of strong sexual desires naturally, as you do and as most people do. So it's tempting to watch pornography. I definitely haven't watched it though in a while. To be honest, I have not watched pornography in a while. And I really try not to watch it. I try not to watch it mainly because it just drains my energy, right? And I get it. It's sinful to watch it. It's bad, X, Y, and Z. I'm sure you get it. But watching porn actually drains me. And I don't like to be drained. I want to use my energy and channel it towards something. And I don't want to channel it watching porn. And also, too, one thing I notice is when I don't watch porn, I'm more driven to go talk to women, right? Like that drive is there to go out and go talk to girls. I'm a huge proponent of cold approach. I think cold approaching is healthy and is good. I think most men should do it. And I mean, I've gotten to the point where I don't really care about rejection. I mean, especially if you asking a girl out and you'll never see her again. If it's a random girl at the mall, I strike up a conversation with her. I'm like, oh, smells good in this store. We have Bath and Body Works or something. I'm like, oh, it smells good in here. I like coming in here. And she says something too. And then we hit it off. Then, asking for a number. Oh, sorry, I'm not interested. Okay, have a good one. I'll never see her again. So honestly, that's why I'm a huge proponent of cold approach. But yes, porn drains me. So that's why I just practically don't watch it, because it drains me and it drains my energy, just like masturbation does as well. Which I'll also talk about more in the future. But in watching porn, it's such a normal thing. Obviously, it's perpetuated in our culture. A lot of men, they'll be I think exposed to it a lot of the times. I think most men, they won't admit that they watch porn. There's definitely a guilt there. And it makes sense, right? Like you're watching another man, bang a chick. Actually, there's a funny quote that I heard. I was like, just think about it. Like, how pathetic do you have to be to watch another guy have sex with a woman that you want? Think about that, of how beta male and weak that is. So instead of going out and getting the girl that you want, you're going to watch another man have sex with the girl that you want. I don't know where I heard this quote from or who said it. I forgot the origin of it, but it just really, that's also what, lit a light bulb in my head. Was like, it just made me feel more guilty in watching it, because I'm always one of those people where I go out and get something. I like to be the solution, not the complainer. So it's almost like I'm into movies and filmmaking. I'm sitting here watching all these movies, listening to all these directors and interviews and listening to their commentary and all that, watching the movies, criticizing it, but I'm not going out there and making movies. So that's why I was like, Josh, go out there and make a movie. Be what you want. Be what you're always consuming. Produce, don't consume. And I think as men, we're supposed to produce, not consume. We can't and we can easily fall into that consuming cycle where we consume video games, we consume anime, we consume social media, we consume so much, right? And that's just as a whole, men and women, we, especially in America, we're such a consumerist society. We're out there making other people rich, right? We're consuming on Amazon, we consume, but as men especially, we're supposed to produce, not consume. So that's the thing, that quote about men watching another man have sex with the woman that he wants, that really, it convicted me, and it made me feel more shameful on who I was as I'm watching porn, because I don't like to feel like a beta male, me personally. I like to be the one that go out there and go get it and go put a dent in the world. So yeah, I've approached a lot of girls, got rejected, got numbers sometimes, went on dates with cute girls. And even though it didn't work out, I'm still proud of the fact that I put myself out there, approached a girl, gave it a shot. And I did that instead of watching pornography that night. And maybe that may be a motivator for you. You might need to, go out and fail at something and at least try, as opposed to just giving up and, falling into your non-productive habits. So yes, so Fred Ravenous, he says a lot of men were watching a lot of porn. And also too, a lot of the research I was looking into, it was talking about how just the dating marketplace is skewed. More women are earning a lot of bachelor's degrees. They don't really need men to take care of them. And also too, as women make more money, their pool of viable candidates shrink, because if a woman is making like 80 grand a year, she's going to want to make a guy she's going to want to make more. She's going to want a guy to make more than her. And that's just because of hypergamy. And hypergamy is basically a mating strategy where women, they want, well, not even just women, but it's a mating strategy in general where species, they prefer the superior mate. So they're superior physically, intellectually, and it's all to protect children, right? So if a woman is carrying your child, she wants to ensure that you're healthy and viable enough to lead, and for her and for you to take care of that child. So hypergamy actually makes sense. And the current circumstances right now with women entering the workforce and making their own money is definitely creating a dating marketplace where a lot of women are in relationships or they're not choosing men. And then you have a lot of very few men, the men in the top percent, maybe 10% or whatever, are taking all the women, having sex with all the women, having relationships with all the women. But then there's a large majority of men that are being shut out. So the research that I was looking into was talking a lot about that, of how the current dating marketplace is leading to this culture of a decline in marriage and more incentives for people to just be hooking up. So less people are getting married. And then too, you got to factor in like a lot of people in general, especially young people. We're delaying child rearing and marriage, and we don't own homes, we rent. Whereas back in the day, it was, you're a guy, you come out of high school, it's easier for you to get a job that could take care of a family. And actually, most women were looking for men to take care of them because it wasn't this huge drive for women to be going out and becoming a CEO at a company or anything. So you had a lot of traditional women back then in the sense that they were looking for men to take care of them. But the world has changed. So the research that I was looking into is very fascinating. It was very eye-opening. And obviously, since I'm a part of it, I can kind of see it because, again, I am alone and I am dating. So I've been on dates with a lot of girls, and you can kind of tell that they want to, they don't want to be housewives. They don't want to be submissive in a sense where they want the man to lead. They kind of want to take over. So you got to deal with a lot of that, especially if you're living in a city like New York City, DC, all the big market cities. This is just a totally different mentality. So yes, the dating marketplace is skewed. A lot of men are single, not in relationships. So it's, I think, fueling the widespread consumption of pornography that's very easily accessible. And also, too, I want to talk about just how much the porn industry makes. The porn industry generates 15 to 97 billion a year, according to a stat I found in Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is like an accountability service that helps Christian men or men in general abstain from pornography. So it'll create filters in your internet use so you don't, stumble upon a porn site or anything. So yes, it's definitely a huge industry. 1 in 5 mobile searches are porn. There was also a stat in Covenant Eyes where like over % of men reported watching porn. I forgot the stat for women, and I'm sure women struggle with porn as well. I don't want to make it seem like I'm only speaking to men here, even though men tend to be the largest consumers of it because we're very visual, and sex can just be reduced to a pleasurable thing to us. We don't really need any emotions attached to it. And I'll say that I know I'm a virgin. I've never had sex, but I mean, I can imagine, right? And a lot of my guys can affirm that. They'll tell me all the time. So I don't want to act like I know what I'm talking about when I talk about sex in that sense. But so yes, that's definitely an issue, this pornographic society we're living in. And two, the lack of infrastructure that I talked about in the last episode, how it's a lot of reasons to stay in the house. You got remote work, you got all these modern conveniences like delivery apps, streaming services. You don't really need to go anywhere. I didn't talk about this in the last episode, but the death of the third place, that's a concept of where do you go in between work and home. The library, do you go there? Not many people go to the library. As people go to the gym, but the gym has kind of become more of people go in and out. I mean, people go to socialize sometimes, depending on the gym. That's one thing I noticed. I've been to a lot of gyms. It depends on the gym. You can do a lot of classes there. You can meet people at the gym when you do classes and stuff. So I guess it depends on your training regimen. But to me, the gym can be hit or miss. I mean, the gym I was at in Nashville, Quantum, was very social. I'd show up and everyone's there. It's kind of, like a social club, which was cool. So the gym really helped me a lot in terms of helping me abstain from pornography and just from my singleness and my sense of loneliness in general. Like the gym was a huge driving factor for me because, not only am I leaving the house, but I'm also being productive in a sense, and I'm building my body and I can see the results. And then, I'll potentially meet people too at the gym. But the gym can still be hit or miss because I do think people, for the most part, they go and they kind of just like, get in, get out, especially with girls. They're already sweaty. They ain't really trying to entertain you when they're already looking yucky, right? So, but, the gym is hit or miss, I would say. But yes, the death of the third place, definitely a fascinating concept, because back in the day, the third place, there was a lot of third places available. A lot of people use the library, but now you got Kindle, you got a lot of electronic services where you don't need to go to the library anymore. But a lot of people used to go to the library, and a lot of people used to, I would just say generally, go to the arcade, but that's dying. Maybe go to like video stores, maybe you had a lot of clubs back then. I think the primary third place now, I would say, are bars, right? Bars is where most people go to meet people. But what if you don't drink? Bars and clubs, that's definitely a very carnal activity, right? Are you going to meet your wife at a club or a bar? But it's kind of what people go to because it's all that they have. So they just resort to going to bars and clubs, which I think is sad. But yes, there's a lot of factors that's keeping us in the house. So it's no surprise that a lot of men are watching pornography. There's no surprise that there is a porndemic. There's no surprise that, over 80% of men are watching porn. It's such a accessible medium now. So yes, it's definitely a conversation that we need to start having more. How do we foster ways to meet people? How do we restore third places? How do we get people out of the house? It would be cool if the library was where remote workers met, right? But no. So that's a very fascinating quote from Fred Rabinowitz. Young men are watching a lot of social media. They're watching a lot of porn. I think they're getting a lot of their needs met without having to go out. And it's starting to be a habit. But I also want to talk about Vudi Balcham. He talks about pornographic culture, which is a very, very compelling argument he makes. And it makes a lot of sense, where he talks about we live in a pornographic culture. So it's not just porn that we've all fallen victim to. It's the whole culture of it. So that's what's shown to us in media, maybe in books, the way people dress. A lot of it is. Vudi Balcham was talking about, in order to get to the root of the pornographic culture, we have to acknowledge that we've become desensitized to it. So for me, if I'm scrolling through TikTok and I'm looking at all these girls, in these videos, and they may not be blatantly having sex on screen, but they could be doing something else that I'm sexualizing. If I'm desensitized to that, then I won't realize that that's what's harming me. I thought that was a really fascinating notion that he brought up, is that even the small things, the cartoons that we watch, or all the subtle ways that we have programmed ourselves to become comfortable with pornographic content. So it's not just porn, people having penetrative sex. It's literally everything else that we have to start being conscious of and fighting against, because that's what's fueling our drive to watch pornography. That's what's fueling our lustful thoughts. So Vudi Balcham definitely, he had a really good point when he talked about that. So what are we bothered by? What bothers us when we're looking at something? Even as something that's not blatant sexual activity. So that's definitely something to talk about as well. And I talked about this before. I was exposed to porn at a young age. And even though I've never had sex, I've always struggled with lust because of that. And that's driven me to do things that I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing. For example, I would go to these parties in the hood, and I talked about this before, and it would get nasty. It's blatant, like dry humping, and you got this rap music playing, we all grinding on each other. And I go to these parties by myself, and I'm getting twerked on, and sometimes I go with my friends too. But the sad thing about it was that those parties were the only place that us young people in Detroit would think to go to meet people and hang out. Because it was fun going to those parties. It was very fun. And that's what I think helped me rationalize going. Was it's not like everyone was going to the library, or people were going to the museum, or people were going to, I don't know, arts and crafts event at a recreational center or something. No one in the crowd was doing that. The cool and popular thing to do was to go to these parties and to drop hump each other, basically. And you got all this music playing, the most demonic, sexually explicit music. But then again, it was fun, right? So, and that's how I met people. That's how I talked to girls. And that was the only place that everyone would go to, right? Nobody in Detroit was really thinking about going anywhere else. At least in my community, no one was thinking of doing it. And I've read a little bit of articles on this of what's exacerbating loneliness in America. And that's also, I think, exacerbating men watching porn because our society, it isn't conducive to building community and is fostering isolation. And that's due to, just from a macro standpoint, this new generation, we're least likely to own homes. We don't own any homes. We can't afford it. We're delaying marriage. We're delaying child rearing. The dating marketplace is very messy. It's very skewed. Our infrastructure isn't conducive to building community. There's not really a lot of places to meet people. You got to factor in remote work. All of that is, I think, driving this loneliness epidemic, especially when you think about men. Like, we're not prone to talk about our feelings and emotions and to cry for help. We're not really good at building friendships and connections. We isolate ourselves. We get into video games, and that keeps us in the house. I think as opposed to girls are good at like really building friendships and getting emotionally connected with each other. And, they have brunch every Saturday. Men are just different. And I know that because obviously I am a man. Right. And I fell into that before. I'll fall into, career. And that's another thing about us as men. We, get so deep into our careers, to building a career. We look up and we're like, I don't have any friends. It's because that's what we were taught. We were conditioned to believe that we had to build a career and make money and make a ton of money. And that takes over our whole life. And then you got this whole workaholic culture and, I work so much, man, I don't have time to do this and that. I don't have time for friends and emotions and all that. You got that whole manosphere rhetoric about really hunkering down and building a career and making a ton of money. You got all that going on. So a lot of men are alone, and it's due to a lot of factors. And I do want to talk a little bit about this book that I read called Alienated America. And it was a fascinating book because it was really it was a very political book. I don't want to get into the political aspect of it, but it was talking about the affected rural areas in America and how the loss of manufacturing jobs had depleted the sense of life in these rural areas. And when you take out those jobs, it really dissolves everything around it. Because let's say you have this factory, and around that factory, you've got diners, you've got bowling alleys, you've got retail shops, mom and pop shops, X, Y, and Z. But when that factory leaves and goes overseas, then everything that was keeping those kind of small businesses afloat are gone. Because that factory, no one's going to work at those factories. They're not going to the diner in between lunch, or they're not going to the bowling alley to their bowling club, because that's what was keeping those small businesses afloat. So you have these rural communities where they don't really have anything. Churches started to die out too, because it was less of a drive to go to church when you don't have a workplace. You don't have meaningful work that men could go to. So this book, Alienated America, was talking a lot about the erosion of civic institutions. And it was a very fascinating topic. And it explained how, back in the day, these civic institutions were how people would connect and find meaning. So a civic institution would be something like church. It would be, somewhere you volunteer. It could be a school. It could be a nonprofit that does charitable work. Civic institution can take on many forms, but it's dissolved over time, especially in certain areas, because just economic landscape had changed in certain areas, especially rural areas. So when you don't have meaningful work, you don't really have drive. So it was explaining how a lot of men in these rural areas fell into opioid addictions and loneliness. They stopped going to church. Alcoholism, divorce was rampant in these communities, and it led them to a certain political behavior and to cling to a certain political candidate because of it. Because they were looking for hope. They were looking for someone to serve their needs because they were overlooked for so long. Globalism had taken hold of how we produce our goods in America, and a lot of their jobs were shipped overseas. So you got somebody coming in that's promising them that they'll bring jobs back. then they start to get riled up and become part of a national movement and what we call populism. But I really like this book because it really gets deep beneath the politics and gets more into why people behave the way they behave. And it really discusses it on the macro level. And then this got me to think about there aren't a lot of civic institutions. There aren't a lot of places where people can really meet. I mean, church is there, church is good, but what if you're not Christian? And then it also talks a lot about just how centralization in general has really dissolved and killed communities. All those mom and pop shops that, we would take dear, the diners and the kind of the little small gift shops, and all that was bought out by more bigger corporate entities. You got McDonald's. You don't need, Suzanne's Burger Shake Shack anymore. Burger Shack. You don't need that anymore because they got, replaced by McDonald's. So efficiency and capitalism and centralization in the private sector has dissolved a lot of those small businesses that would give a lot of people a lot of ways to get to know each other and to have a sense of meaningful work and to support other people in their community who own the small business. But when you're just going to McDonald's, you're just like, oh, it's McDonald's. These are everywhere. So it's just a fascinating book that talks a lot about all the ways that people would connect is going away. A lot of the ways that people would connect. And then in terms of centralization too, it talks a lot about how the government has gotten so big that it's taken on so many forms and so many roles. So the church back in the day was very proactive in charitable work and volunteering and really giving money to a lot of nonprofits. But because the government grew so big, the government took on that role. So it disincentivized the church to take on that role and really giving and serving in that capacity. So churches have decreased in a sense of their influence because they stopped getting as involved as they used to be. Then you got to factor in people just stop going to church in general. I mean, there's stats to show that church attendance has declined. So if less and less people are going to church, that's really killing off a very pivotal outlet in meeting people and finding ways to serve and to find meaning in life. So when you kill that off, you get rid of all these civic institutions, all these ways people can serve and connect. You foster isolation. So Alienated America is a really great book by Tim Carney. Hope you can check it out. I would love to have him on this podcast to talk a lot about it someday because it really got me thinking about the dynamics in our society is creating loneliness, is fostering isolation. We don't really have the infrastructure to meet people like it used to be back in the day. And another thing this book touched on was clubs. Like, who has book clubs nowadays? Book clubs, bowling clubs. No one really does that anymore, but that used to be such a big thing. A lot of men, maybe in the 50s and 60s, used to be a part of bowling clubs. That was a huge thing. They would go bowl after work. They'd be out bowling and then the wives would be at home preparing dinner. So that's a thing in itself that kind of died off. The whole people being a part of clubs isn't really a thing like it used to be, and bowling clubs have died along with church membership and all that. So when you think about all of that, the difficulties of meeting people, it really traps you in the house. And you got to think there's really no reason to leave a house nowadays. I think about myself. I would stay in the house all day if I could. And it's kind of depressing because if you want to leave a house, you got to spend money. But I try to go to coffee shops. I work remote. Remote work, I think, is inducing a lot of isolation as well. Because if you're not going and putting on something nice and going to the office and interacting with people, then that right there kind of kills off everything else that you would do in the day in terms of finding friends and meeting people, especially in an industry where you share similar passions. That's gone. So remote work is a dynamic that I think is driving isolation. And it's so many other ways that's driving isolation for young men. So we already are inclined to watch pornography. What makes it worse is the infrastructure that's keeping us in the house. You got all delivery apps, you got streaming services. You don't have to go to the movies anymore. You can watch a movie at home. You've got DoorDash. You don't have to go and get food and go eat out. You can just order order that in. Dating apps, it's not really not a drive for you to go out and talk to women. You can just, just left, right on your phone all day. There's just so many ways that to keep you in the house. There's no reason to leave the house. And I just think that that's bad for our society. It's bad for this pornographic culture that we're living in. Because if porn is so accessible and if it's free and it's easy to watch nowadays, it's going to be hard to come out of that when there's no reason to leave a house. There's a stat that I saw: 83% of men have reported watching porn by Bed Bible. You can look it up. That was one source that I read, but it was another source, Covenant Eyes, in terms of Christians. I think it was like 69% of men, over 60% of men Christian men reported watching porn. Women was maybe in the 40s somewhere, which made sense. Men watch porn. 1 in 5 mobile searches on the phone is for porn. Pornography is $1 billion industry. It's generating so much money. You got OnlyFans now. You got a lot of women taking on the form of a girlfriend for you through a screen. So you can get your needs satisfied on a screen and in your home. You don't have much of a drive to leave the house anymore. This is a critical issue that I think most people need to solve and tackle. You need to run towards it with a spear or a sword and we got to fight this, because I don't see how to get any better, because technology is only going to improve. Artificial intelligence is improving, and men, we're very visual. We don't really need to get our needs met through a woman physically anymore. We can just watch porn, and then porn is going to get more sophisticated. And, what if you have artificial intelligence and robots or whatever that's going to satisfy our needs? I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds into this, but a little bit, but that's just what I think about, right? Technology is only going to improve. It's going to incentivize for us to stay in the house, disincentivize for us to leave the house. It's going to drive this loneliness epidemic even further and porn consumption even harder. And we got to fix it. I would say that the best thing to do is to be proactive in meeting people, and you kind of have to work your way around it. And I know that's kind of, that sounds it's a simple thing to say, but obviously it's a lot harder than what it is. Because, you can go to the gym, but people go to the gym and the gym is very, you go in and you get out. You just want to go in, get your workout in and get out. Especially if you're trying to talk to girls. I mean, they're already sweaty and they get hit on a lot in general. And a lot of them are, good looking. If you're in the gym, you're pretty healthy, you're fit, you're good looking. So a lot of men are going to hit on you. So it's kind of tricky trying to talk to girls in the gym. Guys socialize in the gym a lot. But then again, for the most part, the gym it's hit or miss in terms of trying to meet people. Like, again, people come in and out. Coffee shops are cool because, you could strike conversations with people at the coffee shop. Maybe you see somebody reading. But then again, coffee shops is something that people come in to use, and then they, maybe on a date, may come to get food or whatever, or kind of get their stuff done. There's really not a lot of places, though, to that's functional in terms of meeting new people, right? If you join a bowling club back in the day, you're going to meet Bob, and Bob is into bowling as much as you are, so you do that. So it's just a fascinating time now, and we just got to stay strong. And I'll talk a little bit about how I realized the importance of community recently. Again, I'm struggling with pornography and loneliness at this time. I haven't really found my calling yet in terms of what I'm doing now in talking about sexual purity and building a community. I haven't really found that calling yet. So at the time in Nashville, when I first moved there, it was really tough for that first year. I didn't really know anyone, and I didn't know how to start because it was a new city. Obviously, yes, in Tallahassee, it was like find a church. Nashville, yes, find a church. I knew that. Tried several churches, landed on one. It ended up becoming a mess because there was some leadership issues. And then I remember having a conversation with someone who gave me some practical wisdom. He told me, building community, it takes work, just like anything else. If you want to build community, you got to put the work in. And that was a fascinating thing that I started to cling on to, because I never thought of it that way. I always thought that community and friendships and meeting people was almost something that would just work out. And when I went to Tallahassee, I found a church, met people, and then it happened so easily because I was in college. See, college has a lot of resources to meet people in the same life stage as you. So it's easy to cling on to people and to build relationships. It's different when you're out of college. In Nashville, I was out of college. I'm in my late 20s and I'm working remote, and and I'm single. So I'm starting all over in that sense. It was different in Tallahassee. So that's what I mean by I didn't really know how to start because it was a totally new dynamic. I was a different Josh at that point. So, you're not in college. In college, it's like a whole different world where everyone's your age and, figuring out life and all that stuff is kind of easier to make friends. And then you got crew, all these campus ministries like Campus Crusades for Christ and InterVarsity. So I ended up landing in Nashville. I ended up going to Nashville because I got a job in New York City, and then New York City was plagued by COVID. They closed the office and then wanted to try a new city, ended up going to Nashville. Nashville turned out very well for me because it was the first time I was able to see the beauty of community. And this was something that I needed at a time where, again, I was struggling with loneliness and pornography, and then I was single. So ended up trying several churches, and this one church landed on, it was like 40 minutes out. It was in Franklin. I'm in Nashville, and I just couldn't do that drive anymore. So then I was like, all right, let me try to stay local. Ended up going to a Christmas party, met a really cool guy there. And then he invited me to a Super Bowl party. And then at that Super Bowl party, my life literally changed. It literally changed because I met someone who I would be friends with till this day. And through him, ended up meeting a lot of other guys who I would have relationships that I would have for a lifetime, which is really crazy if you think about it, how just one decision you make, one step you can take in putting yourself out there and going somewhere alone and being proactive can literally change your life. And that's something that I wasn't really thinking about at the time. I'm thinking, okay, all right, I got to put in the work to get community. All right, let's see how this turns out. And he was right, because I easily just wanted to stay in the house because I tried so many things, and then you just give up. You go to this event, you go to that event, you go to this singles meetup, and then you go to, play pickleball with these people, and then this stuff just fizzles out. You try so many things, and then it fizzles out, and then you just start to go, it's just not going to work out for me. But again, took that leap of faith. I was like, all right, let me go to this Christmas party. And then literally that one decision changed my life. And I mean that because when you talk about how community can really build you up and bless you, you really start to see how God is who he truly is and who he says he is. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all will be added unto you. Because I was seeking the kingdom of God, he provided me with friendships that I would have for a lifetime that would provide to me the practical wisdom that I need to fight off my pornographic indulgences. I think that works because that's what I was struggling with. And a lot of men are, and a lot of men don't have the tools to build community, and are struggling with loneliness because of the infrastructure that I talked about before. But yes, Nashville was a very significant chapter in my life because I, at that point, saw the importance of community. And it took 12 years into being a Christian for me to realize that, because I think before I kind of took it all for granted, it was all laid out to me. And then even between, I'd say, Tallahassee and Nashville, in between that space, like my mid-20s, I was so deeply devoted to career that I didn't care about building friendships with people. Like, I just turned a lot of stuff down. So it was a really, I would say, difficult time in my life because I was struggling with loneliness, but because I wasn't proactive and trying to solve it, and because I didn't see the importance of community, that's when my pornography consumption became more drastic, because I wasn't really that proactive in trying to figure it out. So that in-between point between Tallahassee and Nashville was definitely a time in my life where I wish I had saw the importance of community. So yes, in Nashville, I go to this Christmas party and meet someone, and he introduces me to someone, and then this guy introduces me to someone, and then he's like, hey, I'm at the Super Bowl party, and then he's like, hey, why don't you come to this Bible study with a lot of men your age? And he's like, everyone's from a different Christian faith background, different walk with Christ, and different denominations. You got Catholics, you got Methodists, you got Baptists, you got Presbyterian. Everyone's from all sorts, non-denominational. I'm like, all right, it's probably going to be another thing that I try out that just fizzles out, but maybe. So I think maybe a week later, it comes to that time that I have to go. But I'll never forget, it was that night. I think I had a long day at work, and I just really did not feel like going. I'm like, I do not feel like going to this men's Bible study. I just don't have it in me to go. I was hungry. hungry and I had to cook and I'm like starving. And then it was just something that was calling me to go. I remember feeling led by the Holy Spirit to go. Then I was like, all right, let me just go. And then I'll get some food afterward, maybe get some McDonald's on my way back, maybe some Taco Bell. So then I drive to this event and it's in Green Hills neighborhood in Nashville. Pull up to this huge house in this affluent neighborhood with a lot of mansions. And this house that I pull up into, it has like a roundabout driveway. So it's like almost like a mansion-esque house. It's a really big house, nice house in Green Hills. Pull up in, ton of cars in there. So I'm like, oh wow, it's a lot of guys at this event, a lot of guys at this Bible study. It had to have been like a good 15 cars in this parking lot, this huge roundabout parking lot. So then I go in and then again, I'm alone and I got that feeling like, man, I'm walking in by myself, but the Lord is with me. Whatever happens, happens. And I've been doing this so much. I go to these events, I'm by myself. Whatever happens, happens. I don't have anyone to sort of speak to my reputation or to prop me up and make me more interesting to people and make people want to be friends with me. I just was like, this is just it. It's just me and God. And I'm walking in this and I'm going to walk in and the Lord is going to handle the rest. So I walk into this event and I just remember walking to this house and then walk through the living room. And then I just saw a ton of men in the kitchen and they were like, almost like they were talking with each other. But I remember when I walked in, everyone was looking at me. You know how you walk into a classroom and you're like the new kid and then everyone's looking at you and it's kind of awkward. And you're like, you open the door and you're like, you're carrying your books and then people are like kind of whispering like, oh, that's a new guy. But it wasn't like that. Like, they weren't whispering, but I just remember walking in and they were like, the guy, Keith Phillips, it was his house. He went up to me and was like, oh, I heard a lot about you, man. Gave me a big hug. And I'm just like, it was that moment the Lord was speaking to me because that hug was the Lord delivering on his promise that he will take care of me and provide me community. And it just made me think again, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all will be added unto you, because these people that I will meet will change my life forever. And I'll have relationships that I will keep for a lifetime. So he gives me this warm embrace and he hugs me. And then he's like, hey man, I'm Keith and this is my house. This is what we do every Thursday. We have guys over, we talk about the Lord and we lift weights and we've also got food here. So that's another blessing that the Lord provided, because again, I was hungry. I wanted to eat at that night and I didn't want to go because I was hungry and I was talking myself out of going because of that. But they ended up having food and they were like, hey, we'll feed you too. And I was like, wow. So that's just how the Lord works. The Lord provides if you're truly seeking. So these group of men were awesome. I mean, they're all rich with wisdom. They all come from different walks of life. They're confessing about their issues with pornography. It was just awesome. So at that experience in Nashville is when I realized community is important and we've got to put the work in to build community. And it's not easy. And it really takes you really just putting yourself out there and introducing yourself to people you don't know, trying out everything, starting something, developing a passion, studying the Word of God so you can be seasoned with salt and so that you can have meaningful conversations with people. Because if you're putting the work in yourself, people will notice that. They'll see it and they'll want to help you and they'll want to walk with you. But if you're really not putting in the work, such as finding a craft or a talent or a career, studying the Word, or just really trying to serve and pour into people, if you're not doing any of those things, then no one's going to reciprocate and they won't want to build you up. So you got to be putting the work in first in other aspects of your life. You got to be building all that up. So I do want to say that too. So if you're listening to this and if you are a Christian, if you're not a Christian, and you're struggling with isolation and loneliness, I just really want to encourage you to, just put yourself out there and to be a self-starter and take initiative, because you never know what can happen. And this world that we live in, this society is not conducive to building community. It's very anti it's just so many ways that's keeping us men in our homes, and there's just so many ways that's keeping us secluded. So just think about that. And thank you again for listening to this episode and the Seek Community podcast, where I like to talk about dating, how people meet people, and building community. And I hope to see you guys soon. All right, have a good one.